Welcome to OA 50, where we'll master mediocrity and find meaning in the dictionary and fight for the respect of dad jokes. Here we go.
All right, so welcome to the program. To give you just less than 30 seconds of background, I probably started and stopped recording this episode, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 times. Some due to technical difficulties, and then once I got over that, then me just not being able to formulate words. Oh man, it's just been one thing after the other. So you would think after all those starts and stops, I would just give up. But no, I'm here. I'm with you. And hopefully those who are listening, you're still tuned in, even after that more than 30 seconds of giving you my plight. But today, we're talking about purpose, and it's my purpose to get through this episode. It is the first of the 6 people skills that were discussed in the Persuasion Switch, which was largely geared towards conversations, whether it's negotiations, high stakes conversations, really, in my opinion, any conversation. I think the people skills are very useful. And so PEOPLE is an acronym: purpose, empathy, openness, patience, listening, and then expression. For a framework on what we can use when we're preparing for a conversation and once we're in the conversation. And so when we think about the first skill, purpose, it's very much so aligned in how we would generally think about purpose, really for anything. And but is a guiding beacon or what you're going to talk about in the conversation, to really have that straight so that you know your own personal driver, what's motivating you, and so that when you enter into the conversation, you are very concise. And once you're in the conversation, you've got that purpose, that driver, that motivating factor to guide and keep things on course. Particularly if they get tangential and so you need to steer it back. So purpose, I think, is a very fundamental aspect, really, of any conversation, if you think about it. Even what I would call toxic conversations or venting, where you just want to get something off your chest, well, that's a purpose. And it may be that you're wanting to have that talk, just unload some crap that you've been feeling, and you really don't want any feedback or reflection on it. Just want to get it off your chest. It's fine. And probably a good idea to share that purpose with the other person or people that you're talking to so that they're tuned in on exactly what you expect from that conversation. With purpose, I think it is helpful to distinguish it from goals. So when I think about purpose, it is really the general motivation of why you want to have that conversation. When I think about goals, those are more or less subset objectives that fulfill or are a part of that purpose. And so to give you an example, could be that your work, you feel it's time for a raise, the exchange rate for what you've been given or what you've been giving outweighs what you're receiving, and you feel it's time to pony up some cash. Entering that conversation, it may be easy to think, well, my purpose is I want a raise. But if you step back and you think about it a little bit more, when you're talking to your boss, it really may be about aligning expectations or perceptions around your performance, that exchange rate, right? And making sure that your boss is completely aligned with your perception on what you think you're doing, how you think you're performing, and what you're getting paid, and the imbalance between the two. And that's much different than just simply asking for a raise. Now, a raise may be a goal as part of that objective, but it's a very important aspect, or I think distinction, to recognize before entering the conversation, particularly if you're detecting there may be some misalignment around that perception, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. But so when you think about purpose, really think about it, use that as a guide to really get to the meat of what is motivating you to want to have the discussion, and then think about goals. Now, it could be that there are plenty of conversations that you're going to have where the purpose and goal are either very close or one of the same. Look, that's fine. I'm not trying to make this overly technical, but to the extent that there is a distinction, I think knowing that can be helpful on the front end, because if you enter that conversation with your boss and all you're asking for is a raise and you're ignoring any misalignment perception, well, good luck. So it's really giving some a forethought to what that conversation looks like. And to the extent that there's misalignment, it may guide you that you want to stack the conversation. Maybe the first conversation is about achieving alignment, and the second conversation is about a raise. And so, although it seems somewhat nitpicky to really try to make those distinctions, the stakes are high. It's a raise, it's a negotiation, whatever it may be. If it's important to you, it's worth some thought on the front end. Now, of course, there are plenty of other conversations where making that distillation is maybe not a worthwhile exercise, but things where it's a meaningful conversation, I just encourage you to think about that a little bit more. So when we think about purpose, it's that beacon for how you enter a conversation, but it's also what keeps you on course during the conversation, right? And I think a fundamental aspect of that is making sure that you distinguish facts from stories. A fact is an undisputed occurrence that's relevant to the conversation. A story is the perception or the color paint that you're using in interpreting those facts. Very, very different. And so when you enter a conversation, the facts should have complete alignment by all participating persons. So those should not be in dispute. X, Y, Z has happened. So maybe in the case of your boss, we'll say that production has increased by 10% and costs have been reduced by 15%. And there's data to show that it's not in dispute. The stories may be quite different, though. Your story may be that those metrics, that improvement in production, decrease in cost, are perfectly correlated to your performance. And so you're the singular driving force behind those improvements. Your boss, on the other hand, may think, well, look, we're a team and there are plenty of other folks who are contributing to those metrics. And although, hey, you've been doing a great job, you've been doing your job, meeting expectations, and others have been knocking it out of the park too. And we're only doing what we're supposed to. And that's why we're seeing those results. And which, if that's the case, that would show a clear misalignment between the stories. And probably a indicator that that first conversation ought to be about achieving better alignment in the stories, right? There's a gap. And so if I was to approach that, and I really felt like my contributions were either the primary factor in those metrics or a substantial contributing factor that would equate to a raise or some sort of recognition, then I would want to think about that and why there may be a gap between how I view it and how my boss views it so that I can effectively bridge that. That's conversation 1, 2, 3, maybe many, depending on how far that gap really is and what I've learned. And then future conversations can be used for I guess it probably in your eyes, the more relevant discussion about getting a raise. But again, if you've got that misalignment and you're approaching it just to talk about a raise and there's a gap in perception, good luck. Good luck. You got to knock that out first. And so really understanding that purpose, using that to distinguish material differences and the storylines that are relevant, because it could guide whether you're going to need multiple conversations, a single conversation, how you approach each of those conversations. That is, are you doing diligence or are you trying to make a persuasive argument because you feel like you've got all the facts and relevant input to make the case? And maybe you do. But purpose I can't tell you how many conversations I've been a part of, either where I've come in without a defined purpose or somebody else has, and it's a mess. It's a mess. And where somebody is raising their hand and they're saying, "What are you talking about? What are you trying to get to? What's this about? What's the bottom line?" And you don't want to be in that position, particularly if stakes are high, or worse, you're trying to negotiate either for yourself or on behalf of somebody. So really think about that purpose in terms of being that beacon, also in terms of distinguishing between purpose and goals, which may be different. And you can use purpose to define those goals or help you think about those goals, but also in understanding what's a fact and what's a story, and where you think there may be gaps or where you think you need further information, and whether a single conversation is going to do it, or if you need to have multiple conversations and really stack the dialogue to get to your ultimate objective and be most effective, a master persuader. So that's the first of the 6 people skills. In future episodes, we'll talk about empathy, openness, patience, listening, and expression. Probably 1 or more of those, or 2 or more of those, we'll be able to condense into a single episode. I'm going to make you listen to more than what's really relevant, but I do think purpose was worth a single discussion and making some distinctions. And so get after it. Next conversation, even if it's a venting one, think about that purpose and get on those other people skills. Those help too. So that's all I have on purpose and people skills. And I will see you, or if you're not watching on video, hopefully you will hear me in the next episode. Thanks. See you later.